Welcome to Climbing the Immunoladder Steps for Success in Science, an iiSIAR podcast, the show where we explore inspiring experiences in science and the untold story shaping our community. Today will be your host, Chiara Testini, researcher in immunology at the Uppsala University in Sweden, and
Larisa Janžič, a postdoctoral research associate from the Institute for Microbiology and Immunology in Ljubljana, Slovenia.
In each episode, we will dive deep into conversation with experts on innate immunity in sterile inflammation, autoimmunity, and their resolution, to bring your insight, ideas, and inspiration you won't hear anywhere else. Whether you are tuning in during your morning coffee or while you are doing your lab bench work, get ready to learn, laugh, and see the world from a new perspective. Let's get started. Today's expert is Mauro Perretti, Professor of Immunopharmacology at Queen's Mary University of London, United Kingdom. Thanks for joining us and welcome to our podcast. Please, Mauro, tell us a bit more about your line of research.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me and for asking to be interviewed for this podcast. I am a pharmacologist, and my line of research essentially is experimental inflammation. So I work on the mechanism of inflammation in experimental settings, which might include animal models, cells in vitro, human cells from patients. I think pretty much as every laboratory, nothing special what we do. But that's the focus, to study inflammation.
Can you briefly share with us about your trajectory in science?
When I started, I was employed by a biotech in Siena. Siena is a city close to Florence. And in this biotech, the laboratory of pharmacology was headed by Professor Luca Parente, and the focus was inflammation. So this is when I start working in inflammation, really. Before, for my thesis, I have a degree in medicinal chemistry from University of Florence. It was a 5-year degree. At the time, we had to do an experimental thesis, and that was in the context of metabolism. So I never done any inflammation until I went to Sclavo Research Center in Siena and started working on inflammation. And that was really like an opening for me. And it was a research center, very active. Many Italians and non-Italians came back from abroad to work there. So many people spoke in English. At the time, I didn't know any English whatsoever because I had studied French. So I found a bit snob to be speaking English. Now, of course, I understand because I can't speak about science in Italian without stuttering or without stopping halfway through because I don't get the words in my mind. And so that was the beginning, really. Was very a steep learning curve. Interleukin-1 had been discovered by Charles Dinarello. We are talking about the late mid-80s. And so we had a lot of interleukin-1 at the research center because molecular biologists could produce it by E. coli transfection. And so we had this tool which was quite unique, as we could use milligrams of interleukin-1 essentially. So this was the area we start working at quantifying interleukin-1 in inflammatory exudates, and then working on the pharmacology of interleukin-1 in animal models and on cells. And then my boss, the head of the department, Luca Parente, as I said, he had been in the UK for 5 years. I just said all the lab head came back from abroad, essentially, either UK or US. And he had worked with Rod Flower. Rod Flower was an acolyte of Sir John Vane and was working on this protein called lipocortin-1, a protein which now we call annexin A1. And so while I was there at Sclavo, I started also working on this family of proteins and peptides, trying to understand what could be the pharmacophore, which means the section of the protein which was responsible for the pharmacological activity. After that, my wife, who had remained at the University of Florence, not like me, leaving university, she was enrolled for a doctorate, and she had to do 1 year abroad. and her boss found a laboratory in London. So I asked Luca Parente whether I could go to London as well, and he found for me a space with Rod Flower here at the William Hart Research Institute at Queen Mary University of London. And here I am, and after 34 years, and it's not uncommon to find people in London that they thought to come here for 2 or 3 years, and then they spend the rest of their life.
Maybe beyond this scientific curiosity, is there any personal motivation which has driven your work in immunology besides maybe you following your wife to London?
To me, doing research is like doing a hobby. So the point is that if I retire, what do I do? Because I have a hobby already, so I'm fortunate to do research. When I was young, I was just interested in producing data, learn and publish. So try not to keep any data in the drawer. Now is more, I don't think it's more difficult, but now there is a lot of attention to impact factor and high profile journals. At the time was less so. It was important to get the data out and to interact with people. So that is the motivation, frankly.
It's very nice to hear that the science is like a hobby to you, because I think it's quite important that you really love what you do to be a successful scientist.
Mauro, you had a real journey. I mean, you moved from Italy to London, following maybe your wife, and that for sure create a lot of challenges. But apart the all moving and everything, what other challenges did you add during your career, and which strategy did you use to push through these tough scientific challenges?
We all have challenges, eh? I think as a scientist, as a researcher, we shouldn't take ourselves too serious. So it's part of the game to apply for grants or to submit a paper and to get a rejection. Of course, it's important to win grants and to win papers, but we shouldn't be too demoralized, because part of the game is also the failure. That is a process of learning there as well. By submitting an application, get rejected, look at the comments. In some cases, the reviewer's comments are valid and you can learn. In other cases, are nonsense. But that is another issue. I came here when I was 31. Then around 34, 35, I had the opportunity to go back to Italy to work in a company as a deputy director of pharmacology lab. And that was a very tough period to decide whether to go back or stay here. Eventually, for several reasons, personal mainly, stayed here, and I'm very happy because the company, meanwhile, had closed down, and so forth. But that was a tough period. So when I decided to stay here, my prof, Rod Flower, then suggested that I did a PhD, because I left university before the doctorate was going to be implemented, because our degree, as I said, was already 5 years with the thesis. So I got my PhD when I was 36. And then at that point, especially after my first son was born, it was important to have a sort of security in the job. I cannot go on a 2-year contract or whatever, which I'm sure we all face sooner or later. So that was challenging. And the solution was to apply for a fellowship. And the first time I applied for a fellowship, I didn't get it. And so I had to apply another year. So that was the solution. I think a fellowship is definitely, at least in this country, a stepping stone towards a permanent tenured post, an academic post. Because the fellowship is when your peers essentially assess you and they give you the money. So they give you confidence. I got 2 fellowships. For 10 years, I paid my salary. And by then, the university was obliged to take me on board, really. So I paid my salary until I was 46, 47, essentially. Which was good, because clearly a fellowship brings some prestige, especially if it's a senior fellowship. And then you can carry on doing your research.
Mauro, but beside the challenges you mentioned, Can you maybe highlight a key discovery or a project or a role that you're most proud of?
When I start working at the company in Siena, which I mentioned at the beginning, leukocyte migration was the hallmark of inflammation. So there was a lot of good research on leukocyte trafficking, what provokes this migration. Chemokines had been discovered a few years earlier by people like Marco Baggiolini in Switzerland, Bob Streiter in US, and others, many others. Adhesion molecules were also appreciated, and so Eugene Butcher, Carl Arfors, and others. So there was a lot of focus on what brings leukocyte out and the process that probably you know very well now of rolling, adhesion, and migration had been elucidated and dissected. Cytokines had been discovered, IL-6, IL-1, TNF by Anthony Cerami, Dinarello, IL-6. So I thought that I was late for that. Clearly, I was following, and in fact, I was using interleukin-1, which I had grams or milligrams in Siena. But I was late to make some meaningful contribution. And so, as I was working on that protein called lipocortin-1, that protein in my hands was inhibiting leukocyte trafficking. And so I published a few papers after I came to London here with Rod Flower, because Rod had a large amount of that protein through a collaboration with Biogen. And so I was then working on what inhibits leukocyte trafficking, first as a pharmacological tool. So you inject or you treat cells or you inject an animal with that protein and you observe. Then I focus on human neutrophils, and that I think was a major contribution, probably the important contribution I made. That paper was published in Nature Medicine in 1996. It was very helpful for the first fellowship. And then I was focusing on human neutrophils, and I noticed there was a lot of annexin-1, as we call it now, or lipocortin-1 in neutrophils, human neutrophils, because using an antibody that Rod Flower had available, because it wasn't commercially available at the time, okay? So the move to London allowed me to access tools which otherwise I wouldn't have access to, essentially. And I observed that the process of adhesion was an important modulator of annexin-1 externalization. So that was, I think, an important discovery, that there was a mechanism of tonic control of neutrophil migration, whereby endogenous annexin-1 could be released by a neutrophil and other autocrine or paracrine control the migration of the adhesion and the migration of these neutrophils. I also implemented the intravitreal microscopy thanks to Neil Granger from Louisiana. So what is my contribution? I was late for chemokines, I was late for cytokines, I was late for adhesion molecules, or I was not in the right place to study those aspects. So I decided to focus on endogenous anti-inflammatory molecules which inhibit leukocyte trafficking. And so what I did then was to write a review, single name, for Trends in Pharmacological Science, which is called TIPS, which is like Trends in Immunology, okay? Then you have Immunology or Pharmacological Science. So I wrote a review where I sort of, put a milestone and say, okay, at this point, this is what we know about endogenous inhibitors of leukocyte migration. One protein was annexin-1 or lipocortin-1, which was my work, but then I was also looking at other people's work. And so that I thought was important to, if you wish, as I said, make a mark and say, I'm going to focus on this area of research, which is endogenous inhibitors, not what promotes leukocyte trafficking. And this is what I did at the time. So we are talking 97, 98, 99, to broaden the activities of my group to study other mediators on top of lipocortin-1, to broaden up, essentially. in order to get, apply for grants, get money, and so forth. So that, I think, was important as a tactical move to try to identify my niche of research. And so that in the future, if people say, oh, what is this guy doing? They will not say, oh, he's studying cytokines, but he's studying endogenous inhibitors of leukocyte trafficking, certainly lipocortin-1 or annexin-1. The second discovery, which was very important, was when I got to know Charlie Serhan from Boston. Charlie was working on lipoxins. So talking to Charlie Serhan at a conference in Florence, so we go back to the importance to go to meetings and talk to people, although you may not plan it. So he was a jet lag. We met by chance midnight outside the hotel. I was coming back from dinner with friends because I lived in Florence before. And then we talked for 2-3 hours. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we identified together that a specific receptor was a receptor for lipoxin A4 and for annexin A1 or lipocortin-1. So that was the first time that a GPCR was shown to interact with a peptide or with the protein and with a lipid. So that was another breakthrough, I think, which brought me the second fellowship, the senior fellowship. And we also published in Nature Medicine that study in 2002. So I think that was a good contribution of a pro-resolving receptor. And so I think to have contributed quite in a significant manner to decipher the mechanism, the mediators, the receptors, or what we call nowadays the resolution of inflammation.
But now you have been also very active in academia industry partnerships. So do you maybe have some advice you can also give us to us younger scientists about engaging with the industry while staying true to the academic values?
Yes, absolutely. I want to say two things. So I told you I ended up earlier with the resolution of inflammation area of biology or area of immunology. Now I use the same tactic, Larisa. I wrote a review in 2015 and I coined the name resolution pharmacology as a terminology which should identify drugs and therapeutic approaches that come out from the fundamental mechanism biology of the resolution of inflammation. So I hope to finish off my career having contributed to, at least in part, to establish resolution pharmacology. To this end, no, we can, but it's not easy to develop drugs in academia. So we need companionship with the commercial partners. Personally, I always work with companies for several reasons. Let's be clear. The first one is the money. You need the money to maintain the laboratory alive, and to pay salary for the people working with you. So in all my career, I don't know now. I don't want to, it's not boasting, but I think in my CV, I may have 100 items about funding, project grants or funding from companies. I think at least 40% is from companies over the years. So since the early 90s, whenever I could, I worked with companies. And probably 2 decades earlier, working with companies was not seen as a smart academic enterprise, because people in academia thought they were smarter than people in companies. But frankly, I always, or very, very often found excellent scientists in companies. And clearly this has been even more so in the last 20 years or so. So always learn a lot by interacting with companies. So first, the money. Second, the opportunity, as I just said, to learn and to face somebody who thinks in a different way from you. Because whereas maybe I was interested in the nitty-gritty of the mechanism, they have an interest from the therapeutic angle. Can this be a drug? How would you make a drug? And so forth. So you learn a lot. And thirdly, if then you want to really embark on this sort of process, and I said earlier that really I would like to retire with resolution pharmacology as an established branch of pharmacology, only contribute to drug development by working with biotechs or with big pharma. Now, big pharma has been very little interest in resolution for many years, but I think in the last 10 years this has changed now, and so actually, first, the resolution of inflammation has been accepted as a process. So there is every meeting now often has a resolution of inflammation workshop or symposium. Second, big pharma, I think, are pay attention to resolution as a potential source of new drugs, although the majority of activity takes place in biotechs. So I don't know if I answer your question correctly, but yes, always enjoy work with companies. Important to keep the money flooding to the lab, to keep the good people with you, which probably, well, again, this can be later, but a very important point is to identify or to have some good people working with you. Please note, I didn't say for you, I said with you in the team. And so the money is important, but also to learn to see at a specific problem or from their angle as well.
Maybe you have some kind of advice for us how to start this engaging with industry partners. As you mentioned that you always worked with companies, how do you do this first step, contacting or engaging with them?
You go to a conference, you listen to people. Sometimes are people from companies. Sometimes people from companies come to your poster. I'm trying to think, earlier I was talking about chemokines and cytokines. I needed some interleukin-8. I wrote to the guy from Novartis in Vienna. At the time, Novartis had a research center in Vienna. They produced interleukin-8, Ivan Lindley and Anton Roth. They sent me 200 milligrams of interleukin-8, which was useful for my experiment. You just reach out from either the literature or after a conference to follow up. And then when you reach out, often you may not have an answer, but sometimes you may have an answer, and then you start from there. So you just talk to people, be yourself. And then sometimes you find a click with a company a colleague from companies, and you carry on.
What non-scientific skill have been most critical to your career progression, and how did you develop them or still develop them?
Definitely presentation skills. I am 65, okay? So I notice now that young people tend to present to the minutiae of the detail. And if the audience, if it is the group meeting or the lab meeting, it's fine. But if it is a presentation outside the lab, to be too detailed is boring and people disconnect. And then, of course, develop presentation skills, which doesn't mean that you need to be wishy-washy. You need to be detailed, but you need to tell the information that you want to say first, instead of describe each single panel of the slide. One. So presentation skills, for sure, I had to work on it. Of course, also the pronunciation, the English, and all the rest of it. Clearly, when you at the beginning, I was very scared by not understanding the question in English, and they say, "Oh gosh, what are you going to ask?" So there is a lot of anxiety there. So that needs to be developed. Presentation skills is very, very important. Pronunciation and understanding. But also, I learned over the years, at least in my view, the slides. Slides which are too complicated, with too many data, do not make it. I prefer to have a slide where the most principal data I want to say is there. If you have a multi-panel slides, I think no more than 2 or 3 maximum, but still also orienting the audience with a pointer to the data you want to tell them, not to lose in a sea of data and then lose focus. So definitely presentation skills are very, very important. And then you capture the attention of the audience, and they understand what you want to say. So how I develop it? Well, by 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 practicing, by hit and miss, by practicing. Even now, I practice, but the same applies to posters. So that was an important skill, I think, to develop. And it is not easy, of course. It takes time. And I think it's important also to ask questions. So it was important to overcome the anxiety and the fear to ask a question when there is an important, international meeting and an audience there. It was a way to show, not to show off, but to show that you exist, you are there. And of course, year after year, you get to know people, people get to know you, and then you start building your own network. So if you go to a conference, definitely you want to go to a conference with either a poster or an oral presentation. You don't want to go to a conference with nothing. Otherwise, you don't have opportunity to interact with people. And second, if you go, be active. I presume not be cocky and not overdo it, but to ask a couple of questions here and there, absolutely.
Mauro, thank you for sharing this. I think a really good advice for every young researcher, and not young too.
During our talk, you often mentioned your mentors or your supervisors. Can you maybe share what qualities in your mentors did you find most inspiring, and the ones that now you try to pass on your students?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Larisa. I think the mentors is very important as a role. So to find somebody you can trust, you can listen, and you can debate. Okay, doesn't have to be only one way. It's very important. My mentor has been a great guy. When I came to London, I joined this institute, which was essentially a private institute. It was all on soft money, and the head was a Nobel Prize winner, Sir John Vane. And then there was my mentor, Rod Flower, who worked with him. We are talking people at a very high level. And so it was very important talking to them. Not John Vane. I never spoke much to John Vane, but Gus Bourne, yes, Rod Flower, Derek Willoughby, Ian McIntyre, people who made major discoveries in their own field. Gus Bourne invented the platelet aggregometer that every hospital uses nowadays. Okay, so it was important to talk to them because I could see they were able to make interconnection. So let's say, in my science, in my research, I went from A to B to C. They were able to go lateral and then come back. So that is a way to bring innovation, if you wish. So I appreciated that. Then, of course, the career advice, the possibility to be introduced to other people via the mentor, that have been very, very important aspect. But the most important, which I appreciated my own experience as a mentee, was to discuss science in a sort of open way without boundaries, and then appreciate when I could notice the leap my mentor or the other people I mentioned could do. As a mentor myself, I try to give infuse passion to young people, to support them for any application or paper they do, and to offer opportunities. And then you have, after, I think at this stage, I have had 35 PhD students, probably 40 or 50 postdoc, and I don't know how many visiting scientists from Brazil, from Italy, and so maybe let's say 60. So I try to, as I said, infuse passion for research, work together, not for me, work with me, to I read and support whatever they want for papers, for grants, and to give opportunities. Then the outcome depends on the mentee. But after the years, I learned, as I just said, I gave you some numbers, that every mentee is different. If they were free from personal liaisons or boundaries, I sent everybody to North America, either to Boston, to Atlanta, to Canada, to Toronto, to Calgary. It's more convenient for a supervisor to keep the PhD student for another couple of years. In the past, I thought my role was to kick them out into a top laboratory if I could, instead of keep them here for another 6 months or 1 year. And this is what I was used to do. So I thought it was my role as a mentor to make the best decision, in my view, for the student, and not the best decision which would have been good for me or for my lab. I don't want to sound like a preaching here, okay?
Nowadays, we talk a lot about work-life balance and how to structure that. And you have a high-profile scientific career. How did you maintain it all this time with your life and so how do you maintain this healthy work-life balance?
Well, certainly when you have children and little children, is not easy. I try to be home. I try to be consistent. A bit like I just said, working every day, do something, but every day try to be home. Not just me, my wife the same. To be home for dinner or before the children go to bed. In England, I don't know, when they stopped the school 1 week in October, there was a major nightmare for us because we live with no families whatsoever around here, of course. But anyway, in those half terms, I never stayed 1 week home for sure. But certainly I took 1 day off to do something with the children. So that was my way to try to balance it up, really. And then I said also not to take too serious what you do, give the good emphasis, it's important, but also understand other things are important as well. So clearly go to school, parent-teachers meetings, try to be present. I mean, it's not easy, but everybody has done it. It's not impossible. So, and then the children grow, they leave, and then you go back to have a lot of freedom as well. So I don't think, frankly, I don't think, Chiara, there's nothing special. Just common sense, and make the most of the different opportunities you have.
What challenges and which opportunities do you see for the next generation of scientists?
Each generation has got different challenges. Rod Flower was used to tell me that John Vane, when he wanted a grant, he wrote 1 page, sent to the MRC, Medical Research Council, essentially sent to the governmental agency. 1 page was the project grant, and then he got the money to do his own research. So things have changed. So probably you live, or we live, but you younger people live in a quite complex world, quite a bit of bureaucracy, not always a bad thing. I think the challenge is to make it. And I think you need to be resilient, you need to be clever in whatever you do, not necessarily a superstar or a genius, but there are attributes like drive, ambition, resilience. So these are challenges, I think, for you to make it. The opportunity, in my view, that you have in your research comes from the unbiased approaches that you have nowadays. So all these omics and AI, machine learning. So you need to have some knowledge there. Even if you don't do it yourself, I think you want to have some knowledge. And that is a challenge, perhaps, but also an opportunity. Because unbiased approaches like omics, genomics, or proteomics, or phosphoproteomics, or lipidomics may allow you to find new hits or new hints for your research to progress. So I think the best way forward is to have an hypothesis-driven project, but also hypothesis generating via these omics approaches. So that, I think, is an opportunity you have. These technologies has moved so much, and the same is for the interaction you may have between different people, different continents, different nations, something which was not so easy when I was younger at your age. The challenge is to find in yourself the qualities to stay in science, especially if you have a scientific degree and you want to do research. And I mentioned those already. Knowledge, ambition. When I say ambition, I don't say with a bad way, I say in a good way. Resilience, drive. In terms of, one thing which I want to say also that, it's not nice when old people, well, I'm not that old, but when old people say, at my time we did that and now it's different. But for instance, one thing which helped me probably 2 or 3 times at least was to go to the library and browse the journals. Okay, we didn't have PubMed, so I went to the library and read the Journal of Immunology, the hard copies, JBC, American Journal of Pathology, and others. So because by doing this browsing 2 or 3 times, I found ideas in papers which were not necessarily related to my project. So I was going there to read a paper or to find a paper on annexin 1, let's say. But by browsing the index, I found another paper on something interesting, which I haven't thought about it. So that, as I said, at least 2 or 3 times enabled me to make connection or to branch out and do other things. And that was important. So I don't know how you can do nowadays, because if I go on PubMed and I put annexin 1, I only get the annexin 1 papers. I don't get other things. So that is a missed opportunity, I think, unless you have some AI system that gives you some lateral information. Okay.
Can you maybe tell us a standout moment from your career, perhaps something surprising or something that was out of the ordinary that you feel, of course, comfortable sharing with us?
Yeah, I mean, we all have some light-hearted moments. Absolutely. I mentioned earlier that serendipitous meeting with Charles I ran outside the hotel in Florence and then going up to 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, which was not planned. I remember when I came here, as I said already, I had access to this protein that rod flower had, which was not commercially available. And I ran the first experiment injecting this protein into mice to study whether it could inhibit leukocyte neutrophil trafficking in response to interleukin-1. So I was in the biological service unit, which at the time was on the top floor here, and the alarm went off. And so everybody started leaving. But I couldn't leave because I had just injected, maybe 90% of the entire protein we had into the animals. I couldn't leave. So I stayed there until I finished the treatments on my own. And maybe 20, 25 minutes must have gone by. So suddenly, after 20 minutes or so, I don't remember anyway, but a bit of time, because I knew it would have been a rubbish, fire alarm going out because maybe somebody is toasting a piece of bread or is doing other things. But certainly, even if I didn't know, I couldn't leave the protein to the nature itself and not to get treated. Anyway, so the doors open and my supervisor, Rod Flower, comes with the technician of the biology service unit, very running around, very huffing and puffing, because they were looking for me outside. I wasn't there. They were worried that anything had happened to me. And I told them, look, I couldn't leave the mice. I couldn't waste the protein. And that's it. It was quite funny because then essentially after half an hour, I also left the building and I went outside because of the fire alarm. The fire alarm, which anyway was nothing serious as I thought. Also, another light-hearted moment was there is a small community which is called the Annexins meetings. We must be 40 or 50, 60 worldwide. We meet. So 1 year was in Catalina, which is an island off Los Angeles, I think. Yeah. And that was very nice conference there. And there was a football match. And so I don't play very well football, but I had 3 young people working with me who play very well football, and they were there. So we had a strong team with these 3 young people, and I made the cross. I kick a corner kick. I took a corner kick. I made a cross, and one of them scored. So that was a very, very good moment. I felt very proud to be able to kick the ball, and the guy scored. But they were the good ones. I was not good at football, I'm afraid. So there are many positive aspects in our job as well. There is, of course, the laugh in the lab. There is the good moment when a paper eventually is accepted. Although we tend to not, I think we make a mistake not to celebrate too much. We think about the next one as part of the move on approach. But yeah, this is what I want to share.
Thank you. It's always nice to hear this kind of stories, to see that science is not only hard work, but it can also be fun. So thank you.
I think science at the end of the day is what is exciting, or what is stimulating, is the group of people working together and towards a certain objective. Really, that is also, I think, very stimulating. I mentioned earlier about one of the kudos of our job, which is going to conferences, and then travel. Of course, you meet people, you learn science. I believe, actually, my supervisor told me science is the only religion, in inverted comma, that brings people together. I think another positive aspect of our job is to have young people, or to interact with young people. So, I'm here. Over the decades, I had many PhD students. And so that is very important, to maintain your youth as well. So the young people, the fresh blood that comes to the lab, part of the team. And that, I think, is also another positive aspect of our job, which cannot be quantified into money and salary.
Thank you, Mauro.
Thank you, Mauro.
Thank you for taking the time. It was good to talk to you.
That's a wrap for today's episode of Climbing the Immune Ladder, Steps for Success in Science, iiSIAR podcast. A huge thank you to Professor Mauro Perretti for sharing his insights, stories, and experiences with us. We hope you found this conversation as inspiring and thought-provoking as we did. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to join us on the next episode and share it with anyone who might benefit from it. You can also follow us on our webpage to stay updated on future episodes and innate immunity updates. Thank you for listening, and remember, persistence and asking the right questions are what drives science, and maybe even your own journey. Until next time, stay curious.